This is the first video to help you get started in Adobe InDesign and understand the interface, the basic tools, and how the program works. To get started, go find Adobe InDesign in your computer and open it up. I have Adobe InDesign 2024 installed, and so that's where we're going to go with this one. And it'll look very similar to your beginning screens in other programs. I'm going to go to New File to get my new document window. And again, it'll look very similar. I'm going to go ahead and put KTT practice layout. And it's defaulting in picas. I'm going to hop over to inches and I'll leave it 8.5 by 11 for now. As you scroll down, you'll see it says how many pages there are, what page number we want to start at, whether we want it oriented, landscape, or portrait, facing pages, and columns. I'm going to start with an 8-page book, and I want facing pages checked. That way, when I hit create, those are the only ones I'm going to change there. You'll notice if I zoom out that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages. When you look at the layout here, this is what's called a page ladder. And so a page ladder is basically an overview showing you your whole layout, all of the pages. If I go over here to Windows and click Pages here, I can also see that layout of all my pages. When you look at these two that are next to each other, for example, this one is pages 2 and 3, this is called a spread, or what's also called a double page spread, or DPS. A spread is what pages are going to be next to each other when you open the book. So think of a magazine, a book, and how you have one page on the left and one page on the right. So it's going to automatically pair the ones that would go together. And when we check that facing pages in the beginning, that's what that means. So if I were to uncheck that, I would have single pages. So sometimes you might want not to have it laid out like this. Maybe you're doing, I don't know, a calendar. Maybe you're doing a presentation, something else that's not necessarily in a book form. You might want to uncheck facing pages. But most of what we're going to use InDesign for is going to involve facing pages. So over here in those windows, you'll see that I've got those pages. I've got properties that is going to have a lot of common information similar to Illustrator. And up here, it's defaulting to Essentials. I'm going to put it in Essentials Classic. I like to have all my info, so I don't have to open as many windows to find what I need. You'll notice that most of your navigation is going to be very similar to Adobe Illustrator and or Photoshop. I can hold my space bar down and get my little hand to move around, Control minus to zoom out, Control plus to zoom in, Control 0 to fit the page on screen. What else? Those are kind of the big ones we use a lot. And I'm going to start over here on page 1 so you can kind of see where I'm at. So the way that InDesign works, that's very different than other programs, is it works with what's called frames. So if you look on the toolbar, you're going to see down here, there's two that look like rectangles. There's the rectangle frame tool and then the rectangle tool. The rectangle tool is just like we're used to. You can draw a rectangle. I can change the color to have like a black fill. If I hold shift, I can make a square. Again, just dropping colors on. And these are just shapes. So you can do a little bit of designing in InDesign, but it's pretty basic. You can't get super into like really custom stuff. There is a pen tool, but again, it's not what this program is made for. So in your layouts, if you are ever going to do something that's very designy, go do that in Illustrator and place it into InDesign. InDesign is really kind of that content holding and layout space. The frame tools are going to be what you want to use a lot for laying out. So if I get my rectangle frame tool and I decide, just kind of make a box here, and I can adjust it with the handles just like we do in other shapes. But you'll notice it has this X through it. That means it's a frame, and that means it wants content. So it wants to put something in that frame. If I get my type tool and draw a box, you'll see that it's got the little cursor, but I can also right click and fill with placeholder text. And what that does is that fills it with this really awesome looking fake Latin. And that's what's called placeholder text. When people work in layout, they might not have all the content to put into, let's say, a book or a newspaper. If we were designing that, we might need to get the layouts ready, but they're still working on what's getting written. So placeholder text is a way to do your layouts without having all of the content ready to go. And then when the writers are done, you can just copy and paste it right in there. But it gives you that fake text or placeholder text so that you can kind of experiment with what it looks like. So I could go over here and I could be like, well, we definitely don't want it in Minion Pro because Miss T will lose her mind. I might want it bigger. I might want to change the leading, which is the line spacing. So going into all that typographic info we know. Let's say I want to make sure that the text fills this whole box. So I can make it bigger, see what it's gonna kind of fit. Maybe I know how many words are in that thing coming to me. I can kind of pre-design it here so that when I get the real thing, I can work with it later. The frames are going to be where we put our pictures. So with this box selected, I'm going to go to File, Place, and find a picture. So let's say I'm going to grab this photo. It's going to place it in there. Now you'll notice a few things when I placed it into that box. First, it went into that box because I had it selected. So when I hit File, Place, it went right into there. You'll notice that it's very pixelated and it's really far zoomed in. It's just taking how much resolution it has and putting it in there as full res. We want to change that up. So when I have this selected, we want to look for our framing options, our fitting options. So usually it's right up here, but I'm not seeing it. I don't know why mine was hidden. If you cannot find yours either, you can go to Window, Properties. And so if Properties is open or checkmarked, then you'll have it here. But these icons right here where it says frame fitting and it has these little icons and some more options. Usually it's up here in your control bar as well. It might just be because my laptop is a little small and maybe you'll see yours up here because mine's more condensed. But regardless, you can go to properties and you'll see it here under frame fitting. You can also go to object fitting and they're here as well. But it might be easier to be able to see the icons to know what you're doing. So when I have this selected, I tend to do two kind of things each time. You can hover your mouse over each button and it'll tell you what it does. But I usually start with I usually start with fit content proportionally. And what that's going to do when I click it is it's going to zoom out so that nothing in the picture is cropped off. So again, that was fit content proportionally. So it fit the content proportionally to the frame that I made. But you'll notice there's like, this is empty space and this is empty space in the frame. So then what I tend to do is put fit frame to content. And now that means my frame is exactly the same size in proportion to my artwork that I put in there. If I go to move this box, you'll notice it's not changing the artwork, it's just changing the frame. Everything in InDesign works as a frame. So if I want to change everything, if I'm like, oh, I don't want it this big now, I want it smaller, even if I go to the corner and hold shift like I might in Illustrator, it's still only changing that frame. But if you go to free transform, which is right here, or you hotkey E, then when I hold shift and do the corner, it's doing both the content and the frame. So this is probably the biggest thing to get used to when you're working with InDesign. The other really important thing about InDesign is that it's not really here. This picture is linked to this frame. So if I come over to my windows, sometimes they're here, links. Sometimes you have to go up here to window and look for it. You'll see that it is linking and it's showing exactly where it is saved to where that file is. If you were to move, if I was to go over here, and I'm going to move this on you. So I'm going to move Lisa's picture to the desktop. Now you'll notice there's a question mark because I've moved it out of the folder it was in and I placed it on my desktop. So now it doesn't know where it is. If you ever come open a file and you've got a bunch of question marks or you see them here, that probably means that you moved where the file was saved. So what I recommend is before you work in InDesign that you have a really good structure set up for your folder where you're going to save this file and all the files that you're going to put into it. So file management, super important. When you go to save the, let me move these out of here while I fix where my file is. If I were to go and save this right now, it would not have that picture in it because it doesn't know where it actually is. It hasn't embedded it yet. So right now, it's just a link that's broken, but you see I moved it back and it just went back to where it is now. There's other ways to fix that, but just be aware that if you move the files around and you get those broken links, you won't be able to save your file until you relink them. So do it before instead of after. That's always best. So this is the basics of how this is going to work. Your tools are all going to look very similar. It's going to be important that you remember some typography and how to work with text, and that you know how to do your links and placing. Let's go down here so I can show you a few more things. If I go to File, Place, and I don't have any text frames, I don't have any content frames ready for these pictures. If I just click, it's just going to drop them down. If I click and drag, it'll drop it in that size. So depending on how big the file is, it's just going to kind of randomly drop it, or you can click and drag. When we do it this way, it's the same as before. It's creating a frame while it does it. So same thing, it's in a frame. So if I were to go in here and start moving that box without being in the free transform, it's just going to change the box, not the artwork. So we always want to be in free transform, holding shift, and figuring out our layout. InDesign is one of my favorite programs. It does some really cool stuff as you learn more about it. If you find it annoying or boring, just kind of stick with it and remember that this is for layout. It's not necessarily for designing. It's not for editing. It's not for customizing photos. This is where you bring all of that work together to be able to get ready to publish it or lay it out in a way that's ready for presentation. One last thing before I move on to video 2. When you have a content frame, and you'll notice, it might be a little tricky. Let's see if I zoom way in. You'll notice that there's a blue line around it. If I double click, you'll notice that the line turned brown, and you might be able to see it in the icons as well. So we've got blue and we've got brown. When brown is selected, that's the content. So if I were to shift and change it, you'll see I'm changing just the content. When it's the blue selected, it's the frame. So that's another thing that if you are like, why is it changing the wrong thing? It might be because you have the wrong one selected. Last thing, one more. Last thing is you'll notice this is really pixely, but the picture is high resolution. What InDesign does is because it is made for layout and it's made for doing a whole textbook or a whole magazine. If you were to have all of that high res imagery loaded in your document would be really laggy. It would glitch a bunch. It might crash. And so it does what's called a preview mode with the photos. So to change that, because we're never doing anything so big, and if yours is a really big project and you get a little laggy, you can always change this. But if you go under View and go to Display Performance, you'll see it defaults to typical display. But if I go to High Quality Display, it's going to show everything in full resolution. And you'll see that that's very different now than it was. Don't forget to save your work. These files get large, and make sure that you're practicing really good file management. So I would make sure I have a document. I would probably start a new folder, and I would put portfolio project or zine or magazine layout, and save it in here along with all of the content that's going to go there, and you'll have no problems with your links or embedding your work.